Well, let's get to the good stuff right now, Jeff. Then we are going to talk about a essay that you wrote at Real Clear Markets on the 7th of May, and it was called Monetary Wrongness Has Authored a Crypto Response. Very interesting. You tied together a fascinating story about a great bullion famine in the 15th century, about a century-long depression, and modern-day crypto technology. We talked about it briefly.
And don't forget the Eurodollar. The Eurodollar is in there too. We've got all of these things. We've got ghost money, ancient ghost money. We've got Eurodollar system, and then cryptos. We're gonna get to everything.
We talked about it briefly with Nicholas Black of the Crypto and Coffee live stream TV, ladies and gentlemen. If you wanted to see Jeff and Nick get into a lot deeper discussion about crypto assets, check out his channel. It's on YouTube. He does a show every single day. He's like a duck in water. It's come so naturally to him. So check it out, everyone. Okay, Jeff, the Bank of France, they authored a paper a few years ago on this topic. This was the starting off point for our journey. Tell us about the paper and where it led you.
Well, I had always, this idea of ghost money had been around for obviously for 600 years, but I had always called it ledger money. So when I saw this paper, it was titled Ghost Money. I had never realized that it had been called ghost money, and what that actually referred to was the same thing as we had talked. We have considered with ledger money going back for a very long time, and it's really an interesting story because what the paper was about was regional variations during this century-long depression of the 15th century. And I that's probably not something that most people get into in grade school history, but they do know something about Christopher Columbus and Spanish explorers looking for Incan cities of gold. It may not connect these things together. And the connection is, Christopher Columbus was looking for India not just to trade, but to get some hard money back into Europe, because Europe for a very long time had been deprived of hard money for a number of reasons, and there's still no consensus, at least no strong consensus about what this Great Bullion Famine had brought it about. A number of them, the silver mines started to run out in Germany and France. There was a balance of payment problems in the wake of the Great Plague of the 14th century that, with European merchants and skilled labor all herded together in towns, that entire class was wiped out compared to Asia, which had a more dispersed population, and therefore Asians were trading replaceable goods to Europe, and Europe only had hard currency to sell back to give back to Asia, which developed into essentially a balance of payments problem, which lasted for more than 100 years, that deprived Europe of all of its hard money, which, as we know, creates any number of deflationary consequences, including depressed economic activity over a prolonged period.
And then the reverse happened. It's not in your paper, but if we move forward a few centuries, when the British started selling opium in China, it pulled all the silver out, and they fell into their own century-long depression. I don't know if that's appropriate, but they went into hell that had socioeconomic consequences that we're still dealing with. When you pull out money out of a system, it causes terrible, terrible damage.
And it was funny, even in Europe in the 16th century, they had a great inflation because they were successful. European explorers were successful in exploiting the resources of the Americas, and especially the Spanish, in bringing back these ships of gold. And so they had a bullion famine in the 14th and 15th, especially the 15th century, that sent explorers all over the world. And then they successfully found what they were looking for, brought it back to Europe. You had an inflationary period in the 1600s. It's amazing how those things all work together.
It's amazing. But Jeff, would you believe that in that period, the Spanish economy started to count on the ships coming into port and the money that was in transit? So they knew it was on its way, and then they would act on it economically. And there's another study that tied shipwrecks to recessions in Spain. So you have a ship coming in, it's got, I don't know how many millions worth, just a tremendous amount of currency coming in. You're counting on it. You make deals, it didn't come in. How are you going to pay? Recession. So absolutely fascinating how that worked. Incredible. Okay, how do we? We're going to be talking about money of account and what? Unit of, no. Wait, help me, Jeff. So
Yeah, it's
store
called
value, money of account.
and medium of exchange.
So we're not going to worry about the store of value too much. It's the money of account and the medium of exchange, right? So
Yeah, let's remember what Henry George said in the 19th century: impediment in the machinery of commerce, or the machinery of exchange. Because what money is a tool. It's not wealth. Money is not wealth. We need to get that out of our heads. Money is a tool for an economy to work. So we don't have to barter. And so if there's a shortage of money, that introduces a friction in the machinery of exchange, as Henry George said, which is an impediment causing these depressions and all of these sorts of consequences. So in times of a great bullion famine or a great monetary shortage, what we'd expect is that economic participants, particularly the merchant classes, are going to find ways to circumvent the shortage because they want to do business. You don't want to have, you don't want to be unable to conduct business because you don't have the right tool available. You're going to fashion a different tool so you can get the job done. And that's essentially what ghost money was. It was a way for the merchant class to get around this monetary shortage by sort of coming up with their own version of currency, quasi-currency.
So ghost money, now we're talking about money of account. And I guess, and what does
when
that
you talk
mean,
about money of account,
account?
we don't care, in that situation, you no longer care about store value because that's not your primary, urgency demands that you only need money as a medium of exchange and the unit of account. The unit of account is very important because in a barter economy, how do you value, for example, somebody who brings to market produce versus somebody who brings to market animals? You have to make some kind of account that exchanges, and the value of each has to change over time depending upon conditions. And that's what money really does. It allows us to more efficiently engage in commerce. And if there's a shortage of money, you got to find a different way of doing those things because otherwise, the consequences are really severe.
And so how did they find a different way of doing things? They got out a big parchment or one of those amazing tomes, and they, with their quills, they would write down, Joe owes this much and Mary owes this much,
yes.
And then that was money.
Several innovations, including the Venetians' discovery, quote unquote, of double accounting. So there was all these bookkeeping. You think the accountants, is the most boring profession ever. Apologies to any accountants out there, but that was a tremendous innovation that unlocked this ghost money potential. Because merchants in a small area or even a regional area could get together and settle up based on this just simple paper money. And then what they used as the measure of account wasn't actual coins because they didn't have any. They didn't have enough actual coins in circulation. So they made up coins. They made up actually ideal coins. For example, they would make up coins that were in circulation beforehand that no longer did, coins that were closer to more pure precious metal content, whereas, during the bullion famine, as you would expect, some of the precious metal coins get devalued and clipped and all sorts of other things. So these ghost money was usually ideal units of account, like a pound of sterling silver. That would become our fictional currency that we're going to use to price and weight everything against a fictional pound of silver that doesn't actually exist. And we'll just keep track of who owes what on a piece of paper that we all agree is our accounting ledger.
A unified ledger that we all agree to. It sounds like Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies. But before
Eurodollars.
Before we get to that, can we make an analogy? Is there anything more to say about the 15th century? And if not, Jeff, can we then segue to the 1950s and the reaction?
Well, before we get to the 50s, what we're really talking about is an age-old concept called currency elasticity. And elasticity is simply, again, money is a tool. It is not wealth. It's a tool for commerce. And when it becomes, if commerce expands at a tremendous rate, it needs more money to do so. It needs more of that quantity of tool. We want the money supply to be elastic to respond efficiently to that kind of increase in demand. And
Inflation.
If it doesn't, it can become an impediment. So what we're really talking about here is an innovative way, but a very deeply human way of engineering currency elasticity when there is no other way to do it. Quasi-currency is a historical example of private systems coming up with their own monetary accounts, regardless of what governments and kings and all sorts of official money does.
Short digression, Jeff, because this is something that's often asked. Inflation, what you just said, money, elasticity. Sometimes on the YouTube comment section, I'm asked, why would inflation be good? How does the expanding economy bring about inflation? How is that good? Is what you were just saying, money is the elasticity of money? Could we tie those two concepts together?
Yeah, we're not saying inflation is good. What we're saying is that when we see inflation, it's a check that things are working the way they're supposed to be working.
That more
Modest
money,
level of inflation tells us that things are working at maximum output, maximum employment. The Phillips curve stuff.
Okay.
We don't have to buy into the Phillips curve to realize that when we see modest inflationary conditions, it's sort of a confirmation that there is enough currency elasticity, that it's at least not holding everything back. And if we get these prolonged disinflation or even deflationary periods, what that tells us is that there is not enough elasticity, that something is preventing the economy from operating in a way that it might generate some inflation. Now, if you go way beyond that into actual money printing, effective money printing, that's when you get into the more troubling forms of inflation. But we're not saying inflation is good. I've never said inflation is good. What I'm saying is that especially central bankers and economists have been looking for inflation to confirm that QE or whatever monetary policies have created enough currency elasticity in the entire system, whether it's US, Europe, or anywhere else, such that the economy, that there's no longer a monetary impediment in the machinery of exchange, and then it can operate at full capacity. That's what it's really about. Are we operating at the best way we can possibly operate, which is what inflation would tell us.
I think it's time for us to get transcripts for this show, because that paragraph or two that you just said, I need to copy that and just repaste whenever I'm asked that question. Wonderful. Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you asked, because we're not saying inflation is good. We're saying what it represents. If in modest inflation, what it might represent, that's good. That's positive.
So, the authorities, the academics, the people in the ivory towers know that there was a dollar shortage. I remember reading an article, an essay, a working paper by Carmen Reinhart, and the dollar shortage she was referring to was to the post-World War II dollar shortage. And so now it's not a bullion famine, it's a dollar famine. And one way around that was ghost money, or what we call the Eurodollar system.
Yeah, it wasn't so much a shortage as it was, as we just said, lack of elasticity, right? The global economy in the post-war era was a global boom. It was the first wave of this globalization that continued on into the last half of the 20th century. And when they designed the Bretton Woods system, especially Harry Dexter White and John Maynard Keynes, they never really thought ahead and thought, what if we have a global boom that really stresses the demands for money, again, as a tool, not wealth, as a tool to allow this global commerce to expand all over the place. And that's really, it wasn't that the gold bullion was short. I mean, you can argue that it wasn't distributed equally or distributed widely enough, but by and large, it was an elasticity problem. And the Eurodollar system arose, again, in private fashion amongst the banking system, who were willing and ready and able to extend this quasi-ghost money currency into the system because there was a commercial demand for elasticity. And this ghost money, this fictional ledger form of money, filled in the elasticity role that governments were unwilling to do. And of course, that led to Triffin's paradox and Triffin's dilemma, which really wasn't a dilemma because the Eurodollar had actually solved it. It's just that it had solved it outside of the government's sphere of influence.
Fast forward another 50 years, 60, 70 years, and here we go again. But now it's the banks that are inelastic, their balance sheets. Oh my gosh, if we had time to go through the balance sheets.
The Eurodollar famine, right?
Yes.
This actually is a famine. And you're right. We're getting into really complicated stuff because now we have ghost money for ghost money because the Eurodollars are the ghost money. And now we have to find another ghost money to get around the Eurodollar constraint. But it's still the same thing. If Eurodollar, that form of ledger money, ghost money, became the dominant currency, the dominant form of elasticity. And again, you think about what a global reserve currency does, and I always think about it in terms of Robert Solomon's three pillars, which are flexibility, adjustment, and confidence, which means exactly what ghost money provides is that form of dynamic elasticity. If that starts to fail, what happens? Well, the private system again looks at it and says, well, nobody else is going to supply the money we need. Let's come up with another form of money, another form of ledger ghost money that will be useful in getting some currency elasticity where the normal channels won't, and official channels are completely, utterly unhelpful in any way, shape, or form.
Well, that's all I have, Jeff. Your final sentence here. Let me read it. Crypto bubbles, absolutely. But that likely to be, in my view, a minor, if ugly detail in an otherwise very familiar, ultimately successful long-term story. There's that optimism we were talking about. Yes, it's tough, but look at our long-term history, ingenuity, overcoming obstacles, adapting, and the crypto assets, this may be it again.
Yeah, and I think we need to be clear, though. The prices have gotten way, way, way ahead of where it should be. So yes, we would say that crypto, especially some of the more exotic forms, are definitely exhibiting bubble characteristics. I mean, it's obvious bubble characteristics.
How dare
so we're not
you?
saying that
What
crypto
hate
is
mail we're gonna
properly
get now.
valued. What we're saying is that it has a long run potential, and that people are piling into them today because there's this feeling that, yes, there is something there. And as we talked about with Nick on his show, Crypto and Coffee, so that was a fantastic discussion, by the way. What we talked about was that governments and economists and mainstream people have tried to kill crypto. They've tried to strangle it in the crib ever since its beginning because they don't understand it, really. They don't understand this idea of elasticity, ghost money, ledger money. And nor does, by the way, the people who are piling into crypto right now. They're just piling into it because that's what's moving. They don't understand, and all the dollars dying and all this other stuff. But what's really valuable in it, and what shows that value, is the fact that here we are in 2021, despite the government's best efforts of at least cajoling it and warning people off of it. These things are not only still here, they're proliferating. There is something there, and that something isn't the Fed is recklessly printing money. That's not what's driving this. What's driving this is this innate human instinct to not let a monetary tool become a prolonged or period impediment to regular commerce. That's what's really driving crypto underneath all of the frothy bubbleness that's going on there. People are just trying to get into it, hoping that they're not late, because eventually, I think people understand the monetary system isn't working, even if they don't know exactly how it's not working. They know it's not working because central banks keep doing things, even if we don't know what they're doing or why they're doing them. There's a reason why crypto continues to proliferate, even if it's not properly valued at this particular moment in time. There is value to them over the long term. That's what we're really saying here. And that value goes back in history a very long way. And there's actually a consistent story here that has to do with money as a tool.
And looking to emerging markets, here's another reason why they're so valuable. Here in advanced economies, we don't quite feel it like the rest of the world does, this dollar shortage. And so I'm thinking that the emerging economies have something to tell us because they're very enthusiastic. And I think that it would be great to get into the nuances and really dive into the detail. But I know that emerging market economies are using these crypto assets because there is a dollar shortage, because their currencies are so uncertain, whereas perhaps in the advanced economies it's much more bubbly. But they sense it more viscerally than the money centers of the world. So a good thing that we discussed Chile. Jeff, that's it from me. Do you have anything
one more
else?
thought. The last thought I think we need to just throw out there is this idea that governments have a monopoly on money. You hear this all the time, that governments have a monopoly on money, and that's never really been true.
That's from modern monetary theorists. I hear that all the time from them.
Yeah.
And
we've had examples throughout history. We're living through one. The Eurodollar, all of these examples that show that's not true. The private economy, in fact, is much better at money than any official ever has, which is why most of the time there's all of these private forms of currency and ways to increase elasticity out there, including digital currencies that I think are here to stay, even if they're woefully mispriced by people who are piling into them for the wrong reasons right now.
Thank you very much, Jeff. I can't wait to do it again. Let's talk soon.
Okay, take care, Emil.